My name is Lena Saleh and I'm the EdTech Guru. I would like to share my story about how I left education and ventured into the EdTech space. From a very young age, back in kindergarten, my mom would even be able to tell you that I would run home excited about learning. I loved learning and all that it encompassed. I always had my nose in a book and was always exploring how the world worked and asked why. That soon transpired and followed me to high school. When I was in high school and throughout all of my years of education in the classroom and learning, I always would see my peers struggling and would try to work with them and try to figure out ways that I could help them. Often, many people wanted to copy off me. However, I knew that them copying off me was not going to make them better, well-rounded learners. So as I ventured into high school, I had the opportunity to go back into the classroom and be able to work alongside a teacher, and very quickly I started picking up reading groups and doing more advanced work with students well beyond what I should have been capable of as a high school student. I fell instantly in love. I had many choices and things that I wanted to explore, like being an accountant because I loved math and being a lawyer because I love to argue and ask those why questions, but I found my heart tugging into the education space. I quickly then enrolled in college, being the first member of my family to do so. I found myself wanting to become a teacher so badly that I finished all of my schooling in 3.5 and was ready to graduate by the age of 22. Like I said, I was excited and exhilarated and loved working with students. And what I found was that the education space hadn't changed much. And when I walked into the classroom, the desks were in rows. And in fact, some of the kids that were given to me were kids that nobody wanted and nobody believed in. However, I never gave up on those students, as we often do not as teachers. So I'm not some savior, some like above all being of anything. I just knew and started to think differently than those around. Teachers would bring me resources well beyond their expiration date, history papers from the 80s that we know once history is printed down, it often changes so quickly because somebody stumbles upon something new. That's the joy of digital learning. I quickly started to integrate those pieces into my classroom. What I can tell you, it was not easily welcomed in 2009 and 2008 when those years of code.org first started and being able to integrate that computer science piece. Many people frowned upon it, and in fact, it was threatening to many of the teachers. I didn't find myself in a very welcome collaborative space. Unfortunately, with the downfall of the economic crisis, I was cut from my very first teaching position. However, it was the biggest blessing in disguise that I could have ever asked for. I then stumbled into a STEM school, which is what I had always believed in that students could learn. And this was a true integrated STEM school, not where it was just a class or, you just rotated through and you maybe did it once a week, but truly integrated into all subject areas. At that time, I was teaching second grade and I was led by Kelly Loth, who is an amazing leader. She at the time was an instructional coach, but it was really her true vision of STEM and how kind of STEM worked in that way. And she really fostered that collaborative workspace. And today she is the CEO of MindSpark Learning, in which they enable teachers and provide them with the professional development and resources to become truly integrated STEM teachers and have the success to give our students that workforce readiness that I truly feel is still not happening in a lot of the classes, and I would be hard pressed to find somebody who disagreed with me. But in those years, we had a huge problem with our second graders. We wanted them to solve real life problems. Not problems that they found in a textbook from 1982 or something like that, but something that was current, something that was happening. And unfortunately for us at that time, there was the mountain pine beetle problem. And so it was devastating the forests of Colorado, and the trees were dying, and it would cause very large forest fires. So we brought industry leaders into our classroom to speak to our second graders, entomologists, forest rangers, even homeowners within the area of which they would be affected. And we invited our parents in and stakeholders to come work with our students because we were still learning. And honestly, this was really the very first time that this is really being seen in this type of a way. A lot of the schools around us, like I said, were doing it after school or whatever, but we were fully integrating it. So we sat down with our set of standards and we said, okay, we have this problem. How can we meet these standards and intertwine them into what it was that we were doing? It took days of planning and honestly a lot of trial and error and honestly a lot of tears and a lot of times where we just wanted to throw in the towel. Fortunately for me, I had a really great teammate that was very flexible and we kind of worked really well and kind of bounced ideas off of each other. And we didn't really allow ourselves to fail in the same way that some other teammates, we really lifted each other up. And that's important when working in that kind of a space. So our students sat down in front of esteemed panelists and presented these ideas for which we provided them little to no help, and they came up with resources, things like putting galvanized nails in trees and coming up with organic solutions, and they presented this. And I remember this specifically. I had a student who was non-English speaking who stood up in front of that panel, and some of them even my former teachers and biologists and things like that, and presented his ideas. It was the first time that I had ever seen this student shine in this way, and I knew at that moment I was hooked. If this student who didn't have the capabilities to really be presenting in front of a panel could achieve at this level, imagine what the rest of the students could do. So it was from that point on that we started really working and believing that our students were capable of much, much more. Unfortunately, at the end of that year, because of the cool budget cuts and things that were happening, I was an untenured new teacher to the field. I was cut from my position. And it was devastating. And it took months for me to get work, but it also provided me the opportunity to work in different schools and settings. I started subbing for the Denver School of Science and Technology. And if you don't know what they are, they've been given grants and funding and stuff from people like Oprah and Bill Gates. And so just a lot of those leaders were investing in this school. So I went in there and I kind of saw how it was working. And honestly, charters just run much differently than public schools. The rules and regulations are much different. You know, you're not really tied and bound to a book in the same way as you would be in other ways, but that just also gave me a different insight and ability to what these kids could do and what they weren't achieving at that high level when they were leaving school. So unfortunately and fortunately, in a sense, I found myself back at a very traditional charter school. The students were really practicing rote memorization skills, and every Friday was testing all day, getting them prepped for the testing, state testing. And really, I tried to intertwine as much of those STEM and collaboration skills as I could within my classroom, but I really often found myself actually getting in trouble for trying to integrate that into my classroom. They wanted our students to sit with their hands crossed, and 98% of them were Spanish speaking students. They were ELL learners, and a lot of them honestly grew up in a very not high socioeconomic area. There would be families upon families living in one small apartment or house, or their families would be deported during the time. So it's very stressful for them, and this provided them a safe environment. And even if these students could they achieved very high test scores. If they could achieve that, just think about what they could do if we provided them with a little bit more building blocks for success. These students could come out and work on a worksheet and probably pass any state test with a drop of a hat, but do they have the skills to make it in the world that we live in? I live here in Austin, Texas, and that people call this the second Silicon Valley. And so intertwined within the scene here, there's a lot of tech companies, Google, Indeed, and a world of startups and people coming here to start their ideas. I like to call them the dreamers, the ones that are coming here with the big ideas and wanting to achieve something big. If these students had not been exposed, or maybe had been exposed to that STEM-based failing forward, understanding that failure is okay, it's what do you do with it to persevere, there would be even more people flooding to different areas. But instead we're scared and we don't really necessarily have the skill sets. I can speak from my own personal self. When I went to college, it was the first time I had ever written an essay that was more than one page. I had a Harvard professor that moved here to be with his wife, and he was strict and by the book, and it was a history class, and I had to write that very first time an 8-page paper. I got the page back. It was the first time I had ever failed anything and gotten less than a C on anything, and I had to redo it, and I had to learn that failure was not going to be an option for me. What did I need to do? And I hustled, and I mean hustle, to try to figure out what this is. Am I still the strongest essay writer? No, but did I learn? Yes. In that time, I took away those skill sets that I know that students can do, and honestly, it made me a better teacher in a sense because it made me more well-rounded. But I knew that it wasn't something that I could sustain for a long period of time. So, packed up my bags, gave in my resignation, and I headed back to the STEM school. This time, Kelly Loth was principal, and she put me in a position of technology. And honestly, I've always loved technology. You could find me taking apart things when I was a kid and kind of doing those STEM things that were not necessarily recognized as a younger age. And my dad is from another country, and my mom grew up in a small town, so I didn't really know all of the technology that was kind of available to us, or even what an engineer was. I heard a story from a really esteemed professional here in Austin about how he thought that an engineer was a train conductor, only worked on trains. And honestly, I didn't even know what computer science was. I knew that was science and math based, but I didn't know what it was. And in high school, I wasn't about to take a risk. So if I wasn't able to take a risk, imagine what everyone else is. So that's why I'm such a proponent for computer science and integrating those tech tools for our students to be able to be exposed to, because the more exposure leads you to more flexibility and the ability to kind of mold yourself into different places. I started working with students in the K-8 space. My partner and I started to kind of draft a curriculum for our district about what technology looked like from K to 8 with a span and then spanning to K to 12. And so as we started to do that, we started to integrate coding, and we started to integrate our own PBLs, and watching these students blossom. And at first, honestly, the teachers didn't really want to have much to do with. I was 25 years old. Who would want to trust me in that space? So I really had to earn that respect. Respect is not necessarily, it may be given, but it's not really earned until you can really show and keep your keep, especially in the teaching space. People come and go quite often, and it's hard to really trust each other in the space, just how it's set up. It's not always a healthy environment, and oftentimes you feel competitive against one another. And although it's good to feel competitive, you don't want to feel defeated by that. So I just kept pushing and kept showing the teachers what the students were able to do. And honestly, I feel pretty proud of this. The students started saying that my class was favorited over PE, which if you work in the elementary space, it's a pretty huge deal. So I was pretty excited by that. And at that time, I started working on my master's, and we built a fab lab. The first time that a fab lab had really been a really true fab lab with true PBL learning, identified problems from the community. Like, we had a flood in Jamestown, and our 5th graders went and looked at the space and talked with those professionals, presented back to them, and they had the lens points from different stakeholders, like a homeowner and a business and an insurance handler, and like kind of what those look like and kind of what roles they would play. And they're doing some pretty amazing things. One of my former students was just presenting at the White House on some of the things that she's done. And so it's just pretty impressive what the students are able to do when you give them that land, when you give them the ability to fail forward and really have those experiences that wouldn't otherwise be warranted in the K-12 space. Very often you'll still walk into a classroom, and there's no fault to the teachers, it's just how the system is. They're still working on worksheets to really practice those test skills. And if you enrich the students in other areas, actually they'll excel at the test taking piece of it. Do you completely eliminate that? No, because it's important to know how to complete a test and how to think critically and all of that kind of stuff. But if you're not enriching them, then you're going to get students that are not ready for our workforce. And you'll see that we have lots of people coming from different countries to kind of fill our jobs, and it's amazing, and we live in this land of opportunity, but our students are not really as prepared as we would like them to be for the successful world that we live in. And the world that we live in is fast moving, and kids have to be adaptable. And working in the PBL space, the students really have to have that adaptability. And so that's kind of where I kind of came from. And at that time, then I left, and I decided that I was going to come to Austin to pursue being a leader at this school. And I got here, and it just honestly was not what I was expecting it to be. I cried every single day, and I honestly wanted to step away from teaching at that very moment. I didn't even want to go past the first month. It wasn't that the kids weren't great. Just the system and the environment was very, very unhealthy. And I know that people out there have those, and I just kept fighting through. Teaching is short, it's 9 months, so I just fought through to the end. And I knew at that moment that something needed to change for me. And I had this great network when I was in Colorado, and when I moved here to Austin, I had nothing. I moved here solo, by myself. I needed to make friends and kind of do that tech community and kind of grow that piece kind of as I grew. And so I went back to the traditional classroom, and I was promised that I could integrate STEM into my school, into my classroom, and I got my hand slapped a lot of times. And then I got put on an improvement plan because I was letting my students explore, and my principal told me I was too innovative for my school and that how I wanted to teach. So I felt uncomfortable. I wasn't teaching in a style that felt right to me. And so I started to network. And people tell you that you need to network. But honestly, it was the most life-saving thing I could have ever done. I worked with lots of tech companies when I was at the STEM school in Colorado. We launched like the first time for the Discovery Tech book, and we launched it district-wide, and we were testing lots of products and working with lots of companies and having the kids kind of product test and do everything like that, and we loved it. But I knew that I needed to do something different. So I found a meetup group here in Austin called EdTech Austin, and I attended a couple times and I felt enriched. It was the first time that I felt like I had finally found a place that fit me while being here in Austin, in the innovative city. Imagine that, me being too innovative for that. And I've seen that at work. I've seen what kids could do, so I knew it was possible. So I started attending, started meeting other teachers, and then I basically reached out to the organizer of EdTech Austin and I said, hey, can I help? Can I try? So I would just advise you that if that's something you're thinking about, just do it. Just make the jump. So I reached out to him and I started becoming an organizer, and something that I can tell you that when you're volunteering, consistency is key. So making sure that you can be as consistent as possible and making sure that you're there and that you're being reliable. So that's also a very big indicator. I've worked with EdTech Austin now for 3 years, and now I am the lead organizer of EdTech Austin. And however, the group will kind of be changing and growing kind of as the scene goes, but it taught me just an immense amount of skills. I started working with startups all the way to late stage startups, to working with teachers who had been in the industry for quite some time and been integrating that into their classrooms. And it just gave me a much wider network. At the end of that second year, after my 9th year of teaching, even though I'm still in the educator space, I decided to step away from the classroom. I felt like I needed a break, and I knew that EdTech was somewhere that I could be. However, I thought that my skill set was really going to get me a job instantly. Like, oh, you're a teacher, you can do all these things, because the amount of things that we do as teachers in a day is mind-blowing. You're tired, your brain hurts, all of that kind of stuff. However, when you go into industry, it's a little bit different. So I just started taking every single class that I could. Something on social media marketing, something on coding. And I started to teach myself actually front-end coding, and just trying to expand my skill set so I was more marketable to those companies. Lucky for me, after hustling, and I mean hustling by putting hundreds and hundreds of applications and having hundreds of no's, and going to 4th and 5th and 6th rounds of companies, I found myself at the current company that I work for, which is CodeMonkey. They gave me an opportunity, and funnily enough, they actually were an accelerator here in Austin working with Sean Duffy from EdTech Austin. So somehow the pieces just kind of fell into place there. But I am so thankful for the opportunity to be able to still work with teachers. And now at CodeMonkey, I still work with teachers and work with them on how to integrate computer science into their curriculum, and how that computer science does not have to be taught in isolation. And I think my most favorite part about being in this role is that I no longer am just constrained to the 4 walls of my classroom. I can actually reach more teachers, see more students, and have a bigger impact than I ever thought possible within the 4 walls of my school and my district. And it's amazing and it's eye-opening to see what you can do, but I'll tell you that my passion for education has not stopped. In fact, it's been refueled, and I'm more passionate than ever by taking this leap. So I hope you continue with me on this journey as we explore all things that there is EdTech. And once again, thanks for hanging out with me, the EdTech Guru. See you soon.